Hey guys, what is up? It is Limited Llama back with another Sorare MLB video. This video I'm going to focus on the Sorare MLB scoring system, and I'm going to be walking through that, showing you how to find it, and then giving you some tips about how you can maximize your players' points based on the scoring system. So if you want to find the scoring system, you're going to log into sorare.com, and then you're going to click this How to Play button. And this will open up essentially the Wikipedia or the wiki page for Sorare MLB. And you can kind of scroll through these. There's a lot of helpful information here, but to find the scoring system, you click the basics, and then you're going to click scoring system. And the scoring system lists out everything that a player can do essentially to score points in MLB. So I'm going to walk through these one by one. A lot of this will probably not be super complicated for those who have been watching MLB for a long time, but I know there's a lot of people coming over from soccer who want to get into MLB Sorare, and hopefully this will be helpful for them. So I'm going to walk through this with an online whiteboard to kind of show you how these plays would play out in the game of baseball. So if you haven't, go watch a video about how baseball is played. I'm kind of assuming that you have a basic understanding of the game of baseball, of all the players and things like that. But I'll walk through every play that can be done to score points and walk through how many points that will get and which players will kind of get you the most points based on that. So the first category is runs. And as a reminder, in Sorare MLB, you can only get points as a hitter or as a pitcher. So none of the players on defense get points except for when they're batting. So that's an important to note. Even if you have a really good center fielder who's really good at fielding the ball, making catches, none of those things get you points. The only thing that gets points is hitting and pitching. So you don't want to get a center fielder who's really good at defense but not very good at offense. So you want to focus on offensive players. Now, the first hitting category is called a run. And a run is what obviously every team is trying to score in the game of baseball. And a run counts for a player when they reach all four bases. So let me select this player right here. So if a player, So if a player hits a single and then eventually scores, that's called a run. And that gets you 3 points if you have that player on your team. So anytime a player goes around all four bases, touches all four bases, and scores, that's considered a run, and they get 3 points. Or I guess you get 3 points for having them on your team. Now, a run batted in is when your player is up to bat and they hit another player in. So for example, let's say there's a player on second, and your player hits a double. That means they get to go around 2 bases, right? They're on second now. And the player on second then would come around and they would score. So your player would give you 3 points for a run batted in. And then if you had the player who just scored, you would also get a run. So a run batted in is when your player hits a ball and it drives another player in. It scores another player's run. So a run can only score when it scores with less than 3 outs. So, for example, if your player hits a really big line drive to center field, and this player comes around third and scores, but the center fielder catches the ball, and that's the 3rd out, then this run doesn't count, even though it might have scored before the center fielder caught the ball. So that's important to note. You might get a little confused about that while watching. It only counts if the 3rd run or the 3rd out isn't recorded. So the next statistic is the single, and this is pretty simple. The next 3 statistics are all just single, double, triple, and then a home run. So single is when the batter hits the ball and they make it to first base on the hit. So that's called a single. If they make it to second base on the hit, that's called a double. If they make it to third base, that's called a triple. And the last stat is the home run, and generally this is recorded when the player hits the ball out of the park. So if they hit a ball and it goes over any of the outfield walls, that's considered a home run, and you would get 10 points if you had that player. Now, they can also technically score an inside the park home run. So for example, if they hit it into the outfield and for some reason, bounces off of a wall weird, and they round all 4 bases and they score a run, that's also considered a home run. Now, the really nice things about home runs is that they actually compound stats. So if you have a player who hits a home run, you're also going to get a run stat because that player scores on the play, and you're also going to get an RBI stat since they drove in a run, they drove in themselves. So any home run that a player that you have hits, that counts as 16 points. And it counts as even more if they have other people on base. So for example, if there's 2 people on base, then there would be 3 RBIs for 9 points. There would be a run for 12 points, and then the home run gives you another 10 for a total of 22 points. So a 3-run home run is worth 22 points, which is a lot of points. And this is really why a lot of the big home run hitters are worth a lot of points on Sorare, such as Aaron Judge. Right? He's worth a lot because he can hit a lot of home runs, and home runs score you points super quickly. The last couple stats aren't quite as exciting. The walk is when one of your players gets 4 balls, and then they get to go to first base for free, and that gets you 2 points. And then a similar stat is the hit by pitch down here. So if your player is hit by a ball, they also get to go to first base, and that counts for 2 points for you. You can also lose points if one of your batters strikes out. So if the pitcher throws 3 strikes and your batter doesn't swing or they miss, that's considered a strikeout, and you lose a point for that. One more interesting stat is called the stolen base. So if your player is on base, and while the pitcher is pitching, they steal second base or they steal third base, that's considered a stolen base, and you would get 5 points as long as they don't get out. So generally, you'll see this if you have a fast runner and the pitcher has like a long delivery, so they take a long time throwing the ball home. The runner can run to second base before the catcher throws the ball to second base, and then you'll have a stolen base. Stolen bases are worth 5 points, which is actually quite a few. So one thing that you might want to focus on is acquiring fast players who can get a lot of stolen bases. But you also want to make sure to balance that with how much power a player has, because just because they're fast, they might only be hitting singles, and then you aren't going to be getting many points that way. So those are some things to think about as you're acquiring hitters. You want somebody who has a decent amount of power, because driving in runs, right, scoring runs gets you a lot of points. And another thing that you really want to think about is you probably want a player who's on a good team. And this is because if they're on a good team, they're likely to be driven in more, and they're likely to score more runs. So if the player you have, say, hits a double, if they're on a good team, the person behind them can probably hit them in with a single or a double, and then you'll get a run for them. But if they're on a bad team, right, the next few people might get out, and then they'll be stranded at second base, and you won't get a run stat. You'll also get more RBIs if they're on a good team, because people will be getting on more frequently. So you really want to focus on players who are on good teams that score a lot of runs. So those are all of the hitting categories. Again, there's a lot of nuance to baseball scoring, and I didn't cover a lot of that. So if you're interested, there's lots of articles online. MLB has some official ones, and you can just look up these statistics and read through how they're scored. And that'll give you some more detailed information. The second way that you can score points is through pitching. So as a reminder, there's essentially 2 types of pitchers in baseball. There's starting pitchers, and those pitchers will start the game for a team, and they'll pitch 5 or 6 or 7 innings, depending on how many pitches they've pitched. Generally, your pitcher will only pitch around 100 pitches, so if they get people out super quickly, then they'll pitch more innings, but if they don't get people out super quickly, then they'll pitch fewer innings. And that's a starter, and they'll start the game. Then there's relievers, and relievers come in after the starter has exited the game. So a reliever will come in say, the 7th inning, and then you'll have a reliever in the 8th and a reliever in the 9th. And that's how the game will be finished off, all by relievers. So the different pitching categories, some of them are focused on starters, and some of them are focused on relievers, and some of them are combined for both. So, for example, the innings pitched, this counts for both relievers and for starters. So an innings pitched essentially means that the pitcher gets 3 outs in an inning. So if a pitcher gets 3 outs, right, they go through the first inning without allowing a run, they would get 3 points for an innings pitched. Actually, even if they allowed a run, they would get 3 points for an innings pitched. So the interesting thing to note is that innings pitched is count fractionally, so it's counted for every out, right? So there's 3 outs in an inning. So for every out your pitcher gets, he essentially gets 1 point. They count it as like 1/3 of an inning pitched, and that would get you 1 point. So if your pitcher pitched 5 innings and then got 1 out in the 6th inning, and then he was replaced by another pitcher, you would get 5 times 3 is 15 plus 1 point for the out. So that would be 16 points for the innings pitched by that pitcher. And this incentivizes pitchers who last longer into games, so you want to pick up pitchers who are pretty efficient. The next stat is strikeout. So whenever a pitcher pitches 3 strikes to a batter and they miss or swing and miss or don't swing at all, that's considered a strikeout, and that gives you 2 points. And you also want to prioritize pitchers who get a lot of strikeouts, because every strikeout you get gets you 2 points. Now, generally, pitchers who pitch a lot of strikeouts don't go quite as long into games, because strikeouts generally take more pitches. So there's kind of a trade-off here between strikeouts and innings pitched. And you'll kind of see which of those is better for your team as you experiment with that. The next few statistics are all negatives. So if your pitcher gives up a hit to an opponent, that's a negative 0.5 points for your team. If they give up a run, that's negative 2 points for your team. Now, the important thing to note here is this is only earned runs. So there's some times where a fielder will make an error and the run won't be considered an earned run for the pitcher, and then you won't lose 2 points. So if you want more information about earned runs, feel free to look that up. You'll see how those are scored and things like that, but I'm not going to go into that now. Also, if they give up a walk or they hit a batter, those are also worth negative 1 points each. So you want pitchers who aren't walking people and who aren't hitting and who aren't giving up hits. And the stat that you want to look for that, it's called WHIP. It's WHIP, and that's walks plus hits per innings pitched. So the lower their WHIP, the fewer hits and walks they give up, and therefore the more points that you'll generally get from them. Now, these last 3 stats are different based on whether or not your pitcher is a starter or a reliever. So the win is generally for starters, although relievers can get wins. Again, if you want more details on that, look that up. But essentially, a win is given to a pitcher if they exit the game when your team is winning. So if your pitcher goes out there and they pitch 6 innings and your team is winning after they leave, and your team never gives up the lead, then your pitcher would get a win. So you want players who are on really good teams so that you can get more wins. So, for example, a pitcher on the Dodgers is going to get a lot more wins than a pitcher on the Pirates, because the Dodgers are better than the Pirates and they can score more runs. So the pitcher only gets a win if they exit while their team has the lead. The next stat is for relievers, and that's called a save. And this save is a special stat. It's only used for pitchers who come in the 9th inning and they pitch without allowing the other team to regain the lead. So both the save and the hold, the rule of thumb here is that if your team is winning and you're winning by 3 or fewer points, the pitcher can get a save or a hold. So if your team is up 8-5 and a pitcher comes in and they don't let the other team score more than 3 runs, then they would get a hold if it's before the 9th inning, or they would get a save if it finished out the game. So the rule of thumb with saves and holds is, number 1, they have to be winning, and number 2, they can't be winning by more than 3 runs. So the save is special for the last pitcher of a game, and it prioritizes pitchers who can close out a game and give the team the victory. So Emmanuel Clase is the closer for the Guardians. He gets a lot of points because he gets a lot of saves. So again, you want to focus on pitchers who, specifically relievers, who get a lot of save opportunities and who can close those saves, because saves are worth a lot of points, right? 10 is a lot of points. So focusing on closers is a great way to get some points for your relievers. And then the last stat is called the hold. And this hold is very similar to the save, except it's not. It's for any pitcher that isn't the last pitcher. So if your pitcher comes in the 8th inning and they don't allow the other team to take the lead, and again you're leading by less than 4 runs, right? Then they would get a hold, and that's counted as 5 points. Now, for both the save and the hold, there's a little bit more nuance that goes into scoring those. If you're interested, look that up. But those are essentially the basics for how those get scored. Additionally, a reliever can get the win if your team if your team gains the lead after they've pitched. So, for example, if a pitcher comes in the 8th inning and the game is tied, and then in the bottom of the 8th, your team gains the lead, then that pitcher would get the win, because your team gained the lead when they were pitching. So sometimes you'll see a reliever with a win, and that's how they get that. So these are all of the these statistics. You can go ahead and look up, find the scoring system for yourself, and then you can obviously Google any of the stats if you have any questions about them. The biggest thing to remember is that getting players on good teams is the best way to score points, because a lot of these stats just compound the better the team is, specifically like the wins, the saves, the holds, and the runs and the RBIs. Those all, you're just going to have more of those if you get players on a winning team. So as you're looking to pick up players, make sure to look up the team's record. You can obviously find that online or on MLB.com and see if they're good or if they're bad. And if they're bad, maybe hold off and pick up a player on a better team. So I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed, please feel free to subscribe. I do weekly or basically daily recaps of how my fantasy team is doing on Sorare. So be on the lookout. I'll post one of those tomorrow, and then one on Friday walking through the rewards that I get. So I hope you enjoyed. I'll talk to you later.